Well, some of you are aware of this famous book, Tragedy and Hope, written by Georgetown professor Carroll Quigley way back in 1966. Carroll Quigley wrote this 1,300-page book, and he told us in his book that he was aware of a secret society whose purpose was to rule the world, and that its agents in the United States were the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, toward the end of his book, Carroll Quigley said this: the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy. Now, I'm sure many of you in this audience realize that you can change from Democrat to Republican, and back to Democrat and back to Republican, and there's no change. Right? So what Quigley wanted to see happen has happened. And the ones who were able to do that to the Republican Party were the neoconservatives. So what is a neoconservative? Well, here's a man who has happily accepted the title of godfather of neoconservatism, Irving Kristol. He accepted the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, and that's socialism. Massive government creation of government departments, bureaus, agencies, and it deepened the Depression in the 1930s, the New Deal. But this man was in favor of that. How and why did neoconservatism get started? They said with the nomination of George McGovern signified that the Democratic Party was not hospitable to any degree of neoconservatism. In 1972, only a few of us drew the obvious conclusion that we would have to try to find a home in the Republican Party. But with every passing year, our numbers grew. I regard myself lucky to have been a young Trotskyite, and I have not one single bitter memory. Trotskyite, right? Who's Trotsky? Well, when Lenin seized control of Russia in 1917, he had a partner. His name was Trotsky. And Trotsky is just as much a criminal as Lenin ever was. Lenin died in 1924, and then Trotsky and Stalin were teammates. So Trotsky and Lenin worked together, then Trotsky and Stalin, and they had a fallout. He was exiled by Stalin in 1927. And he ended up in Mexico, where he was slain by one of Stalin's agents with an axe through his head. Okay, so the neoconservative movement is socialism, internationalism, and Trotskyism. This was formed after the election in 1992 when George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, was beaten. And his top assistants, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, had already decided, after having engineered the first attack on Saddam Hussein, they wanted to do it again. But they weren't able to do that because Papa Bush lost the election to Bill Clinton. Okay, so the project of the New American Century was formed during the Clinton administration by these people. So, the path to war. So out of office in '93, they formed the PNAC. They petitioned Clinton and Gingrich, who was then Speaker of the House, to invade Iraq. Well, Clinton got himself tied up with some personal matters.
I am looking forward to the opportunity in the next few days of testifying. I will do so completely and truthfully. I am anxious to do it, but I hope you can understand why in the interim I can and should have no further comment on these matters. Thank you very much.
Are you standing by your public statement on Monica Lewinsky, Mr. President?
Wasn't able to do it. So George W. Bush became president in 2001. He selected neocons Cheney and Rumsfeld as his topmost assistants. They said that we must use U.S. power to meet global responsibilities, strengthen ties to allies, challenge regimes hostile to our values. They urged the invasion of Iraq before 9/11.
Holy shit, Martin. That's the other building. That's terrorist. Other building? That's terrorist, bro.
Rahm Emanuel said, "A crisis is a terrible thing to waste." He obtained authorization to invade Afghanistan and Iraq from the United Nations. He started forcing U.S. values on other peoples and other nations.
Either you're with us, either you love freedom and with nations which embrace freedom, or you're with the enemy. There's no in between. No in between. There's no in between.
Prominent neoconservatives who hold membership in the Council on Foreign Relations: Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Charles Krauthammer, Elliott Abrams, Newt Gingrich, Condoleezza Rice, Henry Kissinger, Robert Kagan, Rupert Murdoch, John McCain, John Bolton. World government. All neoconservatives want world government. They may have minor disagreements among themselves, but they all favor continued U.S. subservience to the United Nations.
Tonight, I want to talk to you about neoconservatism and their rise to power and virtual takeover of U.S. foreign policy.
Most Jews were communists in the 1930s. Most Jews lived in New York City at that time. Most of the Jews at that point went to City College in New York. And we have the famous story of Alcove A at the lunchroom there, which was the Stalinists, and Irving Kristol was part of Alcove B and the Trotskyites. And so our story begins pretty much in the 1970s. We had Watergate, and then following Watergate, which was a coup d'etat that got rid of Richard Nixon. And during this period of time, we also had the end of the fall of Vietnam. And so we had a widespread sense of disillusionment in the country, and a widespread sense that somehow America's foreign policy had gotten out of control, specifically because of the CIA. And so Jimmy Carter decided to capitalize on this and make it the issue of his presidential campaign. And it succeeded. He got elected, was elected in 1976, and in 1977 he decided that he's going to clean house. Perpetrates what came to be known as the Halloween Massacre, the Carter administration's attempt to bring the CIA under control. The result of this was anywhere between 800 and 2,000 rogue CIA agents, also known as cowboys, were basically fired. George H.W. Bush is one of the cowboys, and he's out of power. And so what he tries to do is basically regroup his forces, get those people together now, and work for the overthrow of Jimmy Carter. Part of this vendetta against the remaining CIA was a plan to undermine all of the CIA's intelligence reports. The history of post-World War II America, also known as the Cold War, is the history of peace threatening to break out and people rushing to make sure that doesn't happen. The cowboys have lost their job. They need to regenerate the CIA. They need to put it back on the cutting edge, and so they need a threat. And the CIA at this point, the people who are left, who are doing the real intelligence reports, are simply saying, no, there's no threat. George Bush arranged at this point was he wanted another opinion. And the name of the group that was to give him the other opinion was called Team B. And Team B were the neoconservatives under the direction of Richard Pipes, the Harvard professor. And they came up with a statement that was a preposterous exaggeration of the Soviet military threat at the time, because the Cold War was starting to sputter out under Jimmy Carter. Trotskyites got their foothold in the government by becoming part of Team B. This was their beachhead in power in Washington. This was their beachhead. Well, let's say late 78, the demonstrations in Tehran are getting more and more insistent, and they're getting bloodier by the moment. The Ayatollah Khomeini absolutely hates Jimmy Carter, and so the Bush wants to be president, and he's going to use his CIA cowboys to get him elected president, but it's not in the cards. And so as 79 turns into 80, it looks as if Ronald Reagan's going to be the guy. David Rockefeller is the one who, through Kissinger, who was the Rockefeller asset, persuaded Carter to let the Shah into the country. The Shah needs a place to live. He's dying of cancer. Jimmy Carter allows him to come to the United States. At that point, the Iranian students storm the embassy in Tehran, take over the embassy, and hold 150 some Americans hostage. This is in November of 1979. So the Ayatollah is collaborating with the CIA here at this point to drive Jimmy Carter from office, which happens. The CIA delivered, I think it's $24 million. The Ayatollah's government took the money from Bush and they prolonged it for the money, and because they hated Jimmy Carter. What they were thinking, they were crazy, because, it's like jumping from the frying pan into the fire. You think Jimmy Carter's bad, wait till George Bush and Ronald Reagan take over the White House. And then there's that great moment when Ronald Reagan gives his inaugural address, and he says, "Free those hostages," and within 15 minutes they were free. As if he had some time. What power this man had. How did he do that from all the way over there? The Americans promise we'll never interfere in your internal affairs again. Well, that wasn't even worth the paper it was written on, because within 1 year they had goaded Saddam Hussein into attacking Iran. There's a picture on the web of Donald Rumsfeld shaking hands with Saddam Hussein. The Americans are going to send the poison gas, which they will then use as a pretext for invading Iraq in 2003. This is total hypocrisy. And then, of course, they lured him into Kuwait, and then that was the excuse to this big coalition to attack and remove Saddam Hussein. But the important thing, from our perspective, was the rogue CIA is back in power. Irving Kristol and the neoconservatives remained Trotskyites from beginning to end. The Soviet Union was the vehicle of the Jewish revolutionary spirit, but by the 1970s, beginning in the 1970s, the United States took over that role. It was the cutting edge of the Jewish revolutionary spirit in the world, where it stands pretty much today.